Hello and welcome. It's another episode of the CE podcast here. This is Joe Martino, your host once again. We've got a good episode today. It's going to be a good one. We're going to be talking about ayahuasca, psychedelics, a little bit of, mushrooms, all that sort of stuff. Maybe not from the light that is typically talked about so much, and it's not a negative light or anything by that means, but we're gonna dive into a story. A good friend of mine, his story of actually experiencing mushrooms and ayahuasca, and sort of like what some of the key takeaways are, and part of the passion behind wanting to do this podcast is just something that I've observed and witnessed over the past 10 years, and a lot of what's been rising and sort of changing in sort of the world of psychedelics, and so many people becoming interested in all that sort of stuff. And I was one of those people back 8 years ago. I was very, very curious about a lot of the research that was coming out about psilocybin and ayahuasca and all that sort of stuff, and I was fascinated by it. And of course these things are illegal, and yet they have the potential to to help our experience. So what is the real purpose of them, and why are they being held back, and what's really going on there? But then there's all these other things to talk about when it comes to psychedelics as well. And I find that although there is finally a culture emerging now that is a little more grounded on the subject, for a very long time, and still for the most part, it's being viewed as sort of like this be-all end-all to, like, if you want to have a spiritual awakening. And I've personally seen that that's not really the truth. And we kind of wanted to dive into that subject today and ground out the subject and really help people that are curious. A lot of people are on the fence. Like, is this going to be something that's going to help me? Is this something that I want to do? Is this going to be something that's going to make all the difference in my journey? And, this is a question I get asked all the time. And I always answer with the exact same thing, and I'll share that a little bit later in the episode. But ultimately, I want to equip people with the ability to make a decision from their heart about this stuff and really determine, what route to take, and really just ground out the subject. Make sure it's something that's covered in a way where it's clear what it's there for and what it's used for, because there's a lot of misconceptions being spread, and there's also a lot of, sort of irrational, like pro stuff that's being said about it that's also quite misleading to people. So just trying to neutralize it and make it all very, very clear so that we can make the best decisions possible. So we're going to be talking to my good friend, Mark DeNicola, who has quite an interesting experience and has gotten a very interesting message from Mama Ayahuasca during his session that I think we'll all be pretty interested in hearing. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, here we go. We got Mark DeNicola in office here today in the old studio recording. How you doing, Marcus?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah.
There's a bit of history in the sense that Marcus used to be attending this office quite regularly.
It was a place of regular attendance for me.
That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
How does it feel coming back?
It's always good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some fresh faces, some old faces. It's always a nice little mix.
That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
Not a problem. When we talked about doing this podcast, there's always a funny story that took place. Leading up to what eventually became, we had talked about this for so long, the idea of psychedelics, the idea of ayahuasca, of mushrooms, of LSD, all these different things. We had talked about it so much. And we all, typically we kind of felt within ourselves, hey, we're not really excited about these things. It's not really something that we want to do. But so happens you had an experience where you ended up, accidentally, I guess you could say,
yes, taking
psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah, I was definitely on board the ship that I never thought I was going to have any engagements with psychedelics in this life. And it did kind of stumble itself into my life in a way that when I tell most people it actually legitimately happened accidentally, they think I'm lying. Yeah. But it did. That's, I can honestly tell. There's lots of people who were there who know it also happened. I wasn't the only one it happened to. Another good friend of mine, happened to him as well. So yeah, my first experience with psychedelics was through shrooms. And it was at a party that I had attended to support a friend who was doing a book launch. It's a great little party, little shindig at this little downtown venue. And I went to the party. I was a little hungry. Most people were. And they were handing out food. There were some pretty good vegan options there. It was good food overall. Yeah. And at one point, as I was still hungry and nibbling on things, they were passing out, some type of snack. And it was like chocolate. It was like this dessert. It looked delicious. It was like in this little cupcake tin type of thing. I'm like, okay, that looks great. I love chocolate. I didn't understand. It was loud as hell in this place because the music was just blasting. And it was kind of like ravish music, I guess you want to call it. And I was just like, yeah, sure, it looks good. I knew the person who was serving it. Like, she's a good friend. I was like, yeah, she makes good food. I'll eat this. I'll just pop it in my mouth. I ate it. It tasted a little funny, but like not terrible. It was coated in chocolate, so it tasted okay. Like it wasn't terrible. It was just kind of like an odd dessert. I'm like, it's a weird dessert, but I ate it, no problem. I was still very hungry, so not only did I eat it, but I actually like licked off the paper.
You went for it. Translation, you went for it.
Yeah, I consumed everything that was made available to me ultimately, unknowingly. And the night went on for a little while. I did not pick up that anything had happened immediately by any means. And then it really sunk into me at one point when I was later just at the bar talking to another friend of mine. And we were just talking about things, and she was standing there. And then just as she decided to walk away because she had to go somewhere else, I saw like 6 of her walk away from me. And I'm just like, what the hell's going on here? Like it was completely caught me off guard. I honestly had no idea that this was going on at the party or that this was happening. But I saw like 6 of her, different colored versions of her, all just walking away from me. And I was like, whoa, okay, what's happening? So I went to the 2 friends I had attended the party with, and one of them is, I guess, a better way of putting it, a psychedelic veteran, that had pinpointed at that point that that's what had happened. She didn't know either at the point what we were eating was that, but she recognized it quicker and said that we're definitely on that. And then the adventure that evening just began at that point. So yeah.
And so, you know, having not known that would happen, then all of a sudden you're kind of like, I mean, I remember that, you know, the first time that I had ever smoked cannabis, I was, you know, I had tried it and I was like, you know, my whole life I was like not really drawn to it, but everyone's talking about it. And I'm like, fine, I'll do it. And I remember smoking it, and like the first thing I felt was like this feeling on the top of my head, and then sort of this realization of like, oh, wait a minute, like this doesn't like feel that good. Yeah. And then you kind of go through this space of like, yeah, I'm not really enjoying this, and you have to wait for it to just stop. Yeah. And so, okay, so you have the experience, and you know, how long did it last? And like, you know, was it something that you were enjoying? Like, what was the dilly there?
For me, the biggest kind of sink in point once I'd recognized it and I had the confirmation from my friend, and more subtle trippy things were happening where just like the room was moving, or I just saw a lot of like odd lights going on. I remember there was like light bulbs kind of flying around, that type of thing. The biggest thought, because I had struggled with anxiety quite prevalently before that, was, what if it happens now?
What do you think in anxiety?
Yeah. So like the thought kicked in, but it was almost comical because the thought kicked in and my mind was working way too slowly for it to ever gain any strength. So it's like it couldn't legitimately get afraid of it because it's just like, it's not going to go there. It couldn't.
Now, when you say your mind was working slowly, is it because you could see what your mind was doing so clearly in that sense?
I would say partially that. It was just like, it was almost as if I was observing my own reality at a certain pace. Usually the mind, at least mine, is very, very rampant. It's always all over the place with thoughts. And that's what from my experience, I don't know anyone who's explained it differently. Anxiety is largely triggered and fed by your thoughts. Yeah. So if it doesn't have the thoughts feeding it so rampantly and going down darker paths, it doesn't go anywhere. Right. So just the processing speed was the big difference. I felt like there's no way I'm going to give it what it needs to have an anxiety attack because it just doesn't work that well. Like right now, I felt like I was just like in slow motion in my head. My body was still moving, but my head was just in slow motion, which was an interesting experience. So at least that part absolved, but it was a little odd. I still wasn't too happy to have experienced it because it was obviously something I never intended to, but I felt that it happened for a reason and I was just going to ride it out.
So looking back at it now, what do you feel was the reason why it happened?
From an anxiety sense, it really helped me to pinpoint the power of the mind, which stemmed to a lot of stuff. I've done quite a bit of work with anxiety, including just fear fully moving beyond my own, which is beneficial enough, but really seeing what feeds it. So for me, it was seeing the way the mind works and really differentiating that. And I kind of liken it a little bit to really good meditations. I mean, we have good meditations and not so good ones. Right. The really good ones where you really feel like you're going to a different place or you're experiencing something profound. This was kind of like it because you really feel what it's like to have the mind not running things. Right. So it allowed me to further isolate that experience and see how much everything that I've gone through in my life, whether it be good or bad, is fueled by these thoughts and how rampant they get. So that it really helped with, I would say.
And so an interesting thing that's often like, you know, talked about when it comes to psychedelics and these experiences, or even whether or not we have like, whether you want to say out-of-body experience or profound type experiences in a more sober method like meditation. Trying to pinpoint the difference here in the sense of, the takeaway, obviously, like the takeaway of like, it's not necessarily the psychedelic that did it as much as it was a state of being, right? Yep. Which could be attained in a number of ways. But like, did you find that when you were to look at, say, a meditation that provided a profound experience versus when you were on the psychedelic, which provided similar, like a look into things, was there a difference in the experience and how you were able to look at yourself and observe your experience?
I will say, and this again is just my opinion, to get to that state is fully attainable from my experience through something like meditation just as much as it is through the psychedelics. I think the psychedelics are kind of like a Cole's Notes version or a cheat sheet to get there. Mm-hmm. So if you are ready to put the work in, which I always think is way more beneficial for people, if you can be consistent with meditation and persist through times where it doesn't feel as good or it's not as easy or life is a little bit trickier so it makes it harder to do, what you can attain through that is more fulfilling because you develop a true strength on a daily basis within yourself, right, to overcome your mind, or to at least not overcome your mind. It's not your enemy, but to just to control the rampant thoughts that can get you in unhealthy places. Versus the psychedelics is just like an escape to a certain degree. It's one way to show you that the mind can be slowed down, but it's temporary. It doesn't last forever. Right. And I would never suggest anyone have an addiction to regularly needing to be on them because it's just not an easy way to function when you're on those things. Yeah. But it's a way of re-experiencing that you can have a quieter mind, although I always would suggest to people to go the alternative route because you don't want to develop any dependency on anything.
Right. And we'll get into this in a little bit, just in terms of sort of the, there's some messaging there that's, I think, profound. But and also what's going on the planet right now and kind of what we're being challenged to do. I mean, we'll get there in a second. But my question was going to be sort of in the realm of, when people think about, oh, you're going to take the meditation route. Oh, great. And then immediately in their mind, they go, yeah, I don't really have time to meditate for 10 years. Neither does the planet have time for people to meditate for 10 years. We're going to destroy this planet. And that's typically the response. And, I know my answer to this, but I'm curious, like, with regards to if you were to, help people along in an idea of understanding, what does a meditation practice really look like, or what does it take to gain this sort of insight? Like, how quick can it happen, or how dedicated do we have to be?
I think consistency is the key with all of it. I think most people who get frustrated with meditation don't actually give it a fair shot. And they also have a false understanding of what they think it needs to be. Right. Everyone, when they think meditation, they think they need to get to some fantastic, non-existent, out of this realm world. Meanwhile, it could be something as simple as literally just sitting in a room for a little while and trying to just pay attention to your breath, counting that for a little while. That is a form. I just think because a lot of people, and even people do it as businesses, they sell like meditation as like this grandiose experience. And if it gets there, it gets there. Awesome. But it's really something that if you consistently just practice, set some time aside for it. I think something as little as like 10 minutes a day. And there's that old adage that says like 21 days before something becomes a habit. Yeah. That goes for anything. And it would be the same thing with meditation. If you actually were to consistently give 3 weeks of 10 minutes a day, that's 210 minutes. That's not really that much. To that over a 3-week period, you'd be amazed by just, even if you don't get to some place that matches your expectations, how nice it is to just quiet your mind for at least 10 minutes a day.
Yeah, very helpful, very helpful. So, continuing on in a sense with the story of where this eventually leads is, we at Collective Evolution here, we decided to take a trip to go down to Rhythmia, which is Life Advancement Center. We went basically, there was like eight or nine of us, we went together. Yeah. Pretty much the whole club plus some significant others. And, we went down there. It was a great place. I mean, I had not had a sense as to whether or not you had interest going into this, whether you wanted to do ayahuasca. I mean, personally, I was, and I'll get into this in a second as to why I personally have chosen not to use psychedelics in this lifetime. But I knew there was going to be some of us on our team that were going to be drawn to it and some of us that weren't, and all that sort of stuff. And you ended up, and I remember talking to you, but just before your experience where you ended up deciding to try ayahuasca. And, this is, again, why this is interesting is, and I'm going to set it up a little bit right now. Why this is interesting is, what I've kind of witnessed in the whole, psychedelic phenomena, the experience of whether it be mushrooms, whether it be, ayahuasca, or whether it be anything. I mean, first of all, growing up as a kid, you see it all the time. Most people are just using these things for partying, and that's a whole different conversation. But, I noticed certain trends or certain commonalities within people who use or within people who continually go back to it and all that sort of stuff. And again, we're not saying this in any negative light. It's more so exploring this because the intention and purpose of this podcast is to sort of ground the subject, really get us to understand the value and the use of these things and how we can go about it should we be drawn to it. And so you notice certain tendencies. And so why it's so sort of comical to me and interesting that Mark DeNicola over here ended up, having these journeys was just that, I wouldn't have expected it. Not in a way of like, Mark's too good for that. It's not that. It's just more so I wouldn't have expected it.
Neither did I.
Yeah. And so here we are. We're talking. We're going back to, I think you were saying to me like, I'm having mixed feelings. I feel like I want to do it. I feel like I don't. I feel like part of what's holding me back is a general fear or a general anxiety. And I'm assuming part of it had to do with what happens if it is, for any of you that have experienced anxiety, and I know I have in my life, it can feel like a trap you're never going to get out of.
Yep.
And it's terrible. So, I could understand what he was going through, but, let's hear it from your words. What were you going through in those moments leading up to it? And what also made you decide to go for the plunge?
In 2 words, I was going through mental torment. To be honest, I'm not going to go ahead and say that I did this accidentally because I definitely didn't. There was a conscious decision that was made at some point. But it was almost as if it was to a certain degree at some level being forced upon me, and not from like a peer pressure or anything like that. Because as you mentioned, we were amongst a group of people that were kind of split. Some of them loved the stuff, and some of them, including yourself, were just not interested in it. Yeah. I was definitely on that side of the fence. I had zero intention of doing it. Believe it or not, after that shrooms experience, I wasn't longing to do more psychedelics by any means. Even though I wouldn't have classified that as negative, it just wasn't. I wasn't interested. Yeah. So I went on that trip with no intentions of doing it. Yeah. But it was just a whole series of events leading up to it that kept coming about. For some reason, it kept coming up. I was just keep thinking about it. I was still like, no, thank you, no, thank you. And then I had a conversation with one of the people we were traveling with who pulled me aside, who did it the night before, and he told me that I showed up in his ceremony. Yeah. And he was like, again, I took this with a grain of salt because my mind was still very afraid. But he basically said, like, I saw you show up, and it said that, like, if you do this, it's going to change a whole bunch of things you're in the midst of. Like, it's critical. It's really important for some other people if you do this, stuff like that. Yeah. I was like, okay, thank you for sharing. It still didn't make me think I was going to do it. But at the same time, I was also slowly doing the prerequisite stuff to make sure I could do it. So I wasn't eating or whatever, right? To at least leave the option open, even though inside I felt like nothing. And then there was other things. So another thing that stood out for me was that there was actually a woman at the resort who, the morning of the night that I ended up doing it, I was going to get breakfast at the place, which would be the last meal you could eat in the day. And
the last meal.
The last meal if you're having the ceremony. Yeah. And I'd never seen this woman before. It was just an older woman. And as I was going to get my food, she was just leaving the buffet area, and she turned around. We'd never seen each other before, and she just greeted me so pleasantly. She's just like, good morning. And something about this woman, I wasn't attracted to her. It wasn't anything like that. But like my whole body just lit up with like tingles. Like I just felt like there was some type of energetic connection to this woman. Yeah. And I was just like, wow. And I really felt like a motherly love connection with this woman. Yeah. It was like purely genuine. There was nothing sexual. And I was just like, wow, that was very interesting. And she just went on with her food. I got mine, and just it felt odd. And then later in the day, I had learned through one of my friends who was planning on doing the ceremony that night that woman was actually the evening shaman. Oh, nice. So it was another interesting little facet to it. I'm like, okay, why is this extra feature here? In the sense of like, if I am going to trust anyone to do this with, if there is this weird connection with this woman, she felt safe, if you want to call it that. Yeah. So there was that extra appealing factor, but I was still tormented between the two things. So shortly before when I met you on my way walking to where the ceremony was, I was still, I don't know. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. With the anxiety, the idea of being stuck in that place for 6 to 8 hours is just like, it's nuts, even though it was a beautiful place and it was well ventilated. Like it wasn't, there's nothing like that.
Windows.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another aspect too. I knew that if I really ever had to do this in my life, there wouldn't be a venue that was less pristine. And I'm a little bit of like a prissy person, if you want to say that way. I'm not the person that's going to go in the middle of the jungle and do this while camping. I'm not going to do that. I'm not that person. So it was a cleaner environment to do it in. So it had that extra aspect, but I was just tormented in this thought. And shortly after I had met with you on my way there, I was literally pacing outside the place where they did it. And I was decided. I was staring right at it. I can see my friends who were getting ready. It was about 15 minutes from the ceremony.
Yeah.
And I was just looking in, and I was just like, nope, I'm not doing it. I'm done. And I literally turned around, and one of the staff members at the resort, who I'd spoken to prior to that, great guy, great young kid. He was just a really friendly person. Just a genuine guy. We had some good conversations, mostly about like baseball and stuff prior to that. But
good sport.
Yeah, great sport. And he just was like, appeared out of nowhere. I didn't even hear him approaching me. And he's just like, hey, buddy. I was just like, hey, how are you? Whatever, right? And I told him, like, we ended up having a little bit of a conversation, and I told him I was planning on doing this tonight, but I just kept feeling compelled, but I don't think I'm going to do it. Like, I can't do it. And he was just like, yeah, that's okay. He's like, you only want to do it if it feels right. You know, you'll know inside if something's really pulling you. He's like, and I had only done it once, and I'm only going to do it the one time.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just had all these things come together, and for me, it played a really dramatic role in mending my relationship with my mom because they had a strained relationship. Yeah. And for him, he felt it was important, but he hadn't done it like the 50 other times before that when it was available to him.
Yeah.
So it was just this one time that he actually did it, and it was beneficial for him. But he was like fully respectful. He's like, yeah, but if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. He's like, it's very intense and stuff like that. So he's just a great support system.
Yeah.
And he was going to go in because he had to finish setting up the space for the shaman. And so he was like, okay, so have a good night. He assumed I wasn't going in. He gave me a hug. We had a hug. And then he went in and I followed him in. Yeah. It was like, I just knew that there was too many signs kicking me from everyone. That's why I feel like it was almost accidental, but not. Like, just like, you have to do this for some odd reason. Yeah. And I remember just entering the space, and that's where it began.
That's where it began. I mean, and you know, we'll go through that experience a little bit as much as you want to share. But you know what, I enjoyed what you said that he said, in the sense of, you know, hey, you know, really going and what's feeling right. And why I enjoy that. I mean, that's you know, my personal message, and I'm sure it's something that you would share as well. Is, you know, when it comes to this stuff, is it's like, you know, go with what's in your heart, not what like you think is going to fix you, right? And I think one of the challenges, and again, while we're doing this, which we'll get a little bit more into, is there's almost a cult-like mentality that's been created around psychedelics and ayahuasca and all these different things, where, you know, once someone has done it, they become obsessed with trying to get everyone else to do it. And the challenges I've noticed on, we'll say, I mean, I've been looking at this for a lot of years. Here at CE, you know, back 8 years ago, I was doing a ton of psychedelics research and publishing it and doing all that sort of stuff. And never been drawn to it, but always saw it as a very viable thing to help people. But the challenge was I saw that it wasn't really creating a lasting impact on a lot of people that were going through the experience. They may feel good for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks or something, but there was something missing, right? So, you know, I do want to get into that and some of the different pressures and there's been so many expectations built ultimately. But let's before we get there, let's continue on. Like you've now walked into the, like you said, Arrhythmia. There's a beautiful little setting there. Yep. You know, you walked in, and, you know, at this point, you know, because I remember, I mean, each night I would go and I would observe kind of the energy around the space. That was, you know, kind of my fascination, right? Is, you know, you can sense some of the anxiety, you can sense some of the fear. You know, there's you know, the mattresses laying down, there's the puke buckets there, there's, you know, the setting is there, and on some of those nights there was only a couple people doing it at a time, which I think is much more beneficial than, you know, 8, 10 plus, you know, 20 people. Yeah. But take us from the next step.
Continue with the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I walked in, immediately one of our mutual friends, who you know is a psychedelic veteran, lit up at the sight of me, because she was one of the people who was very adamant on getting everybody on board and really wanted to see me do it. So she lit up at the face. I remember that moment and she set aside a bed. She moved herself actually to make sure she had one right next to me, which was fine. I was more than comfortable with that. I'd rather be around somebody I know. Yeah. There were about, I want to say, I can't remember exactly, but somewhere between 20, 25 people doing the ceremony that night. So it was a bigger night. There were 2 other people that we also knew from our team that happened to be doing it that night as well. They weren't in the same space as us. They were in a different part of the room. Yeah. But I went there, and I was definitely nervous, kind of like, wow, I'm really doing this. But there was still something under a calm that was like, it had to be done for some reason. Yeah. So I felt a little bit of peace in that, but I settled in my bed, and for some reason, whenever the shaman spoke, whenever I saw her, I felt extra calm. Again, she was very motherly to me. It was just very caring. So it helped me stay calm in that capacity. Also, I remember the person to the left of me, it was his first time ever doing it. It was nice talking to him for a couple minutes before we started. Yeah. He was was hungry for this. He came here for this. So this was like his moment. So it was interesting for me being like really unsure. Don't even know why I'm doing this to a guy who came on this trip specifically to do this evening.
Yeah.
So it was a good little polarity there. But the evening began. The shaman kind of laid out the way she was going to do things. She did things a little, from what I understand, different than a typical ceremony. She splits things into 2 drinks. So there were the first part. She would make sure everyone got that first. Then she would start the second part. It was only the second part that contained DMT. They both had ayahuasca properties, but only the second part had the DMT within it.
Right. She
just felt it settled within the body better and created a cleaner experience. So that was fine. Based off of bed positioning, I had no idea, but I was the 3rd person to drink just after our friend that we knew was also doing it. And I remember just sitting there ready to do it and just like, okay, this is happening. Oh, and first there was a smudging ceremony, just like cleansing of auras, cleansing of, which was fine.
With smoke sort of thing. Yeah,
that's harmless. That was just what it was. I'd done those before. So my friend had gone, came back. I knew it was my turn. And I was just walking towards the area. There's a little pillow seated in front of the shaman, and she's preparing the drink or whatever. And she leaned forward and talked to me, and she was very supportive again. She was happy to see me again in that capacity. And she had asked if I had ever done this before. Yeah. And I said nope, and I never thought I would. And then she's like, well, you're here for a reason. And then she said those words again. I'm like, okay, this is, I guess I am for some reason. And she's like, I'll watch you over the course of the night. And she had 2 assistants, like, we'll make sure we pay close attention to you to comfort you and provide whatever energetic support we can to get you through the evening. But you're in a safe space and we'll take care of you. So that was comforting, of course, to hear. It's good words to hear. And I remember just getting the drink. She did a little thing over it. This was, again, just part 1 of the drink. I consumed it. Tasted terrible. But did it. Felt nothing instantaneously. So just walked back to my bed and sat up for a little while.
Just a side note here. So, I mean, you know, in terms of size of the drink, because this is typically a question that comes up, you know, what are we talking about in terms of a cup, a shot glass, like, you know?
Shot glass would be the closest to it. It's actually in the second part where she asked me if I wanted to go a little lighter. And then I said, whatever you think is best, because she could tell I was getting nervous. But then she ended up doing a normal because she felt like that's what she was guided to do. Right. But it was like close to a shot glass, I would say.
Right. Yeah. So you've taken a drink. You're now back at your bed, and
just sitting back. My mind was still engaged at this point. I wanted to prove that I was going to be okay. So I remember sitting there, and you can't talk to anybody anymore. You're not supposed to talk to the people around you. Right. So you're in your own space, and I was just sitting there with my back leaned against the wall, and I was challenging myself to stay mentally present. So I'm like, this is going to do nothing to me. I'm going to be fine. Like, I was being macho in the sense of that. So I started challenging myself. I was listing off like my relatives. I was like, I'm going to list off all their names. I know them all right now. And I'm like, I'm going to list off the entire Toronto Blue Jays lineup. I'm going to list it off right now. I know it all. This is what they do against lefties right now. Like, I listed off everything to make sure I was engaged. Yeah. I started that process, and then some X amount of time went by, and I stopped my thoughts for a second, and I realized everything I had thought since the Blue Jays lineup started, it was like not my thoughts. My mind went on like a rampage from there with a whole bunch of thoughts that weren't mine.
When you say weren't yours, what does that mean?
Just like really odd, obscure thoughts. Like I was seeing random things. I was going in places that my mind just typically doesn't go. So I was just like, didn't feel like my thoughts. That's the best way to say it. That it stood out to me. Yeah. And I had this moment of stopping, like, okay, that's a little weird. Maybe this is what it's going to be. It's just my mind's going to be a little bit odd. Yeah. Right? So I'm like, this is nothing. I'm going to regain control. And I remember I closed my eyes just to try and take a second. Again, I still hadn't done the second part of the drink yet. So I closed my eyes, and then when I opened it is when the trip, I guess you want to call it, really hit for the first time. I opened up in the space, and not only were there the people that were actually in the space, but there were now frequencies flying around the room. So I saw colored frequencies just flying, bouncing off the walls, and I was like, okay, like I'm going to see things, but these are fine. I didn't feel threatened by them. I didn't feel anything. I was like, this is very interesting. So that was something to take in to further solidify that something was going to happen. That of some type of stimulation that I was going to be experiencing. And from that point, I remember it was audibly very intense. So I started to hear there was fans rotating around the room to kind of circulate the air, and it got really loud. And like I looked up at the fan, and the fan was moving visually for me in slow motion. It was kind of like, but the sound of it was as if it was in my head. Yeah. So it was like so loud, bouncing in my head. I'm just like, okay, this is like, it really hurt my head to hear it. And I was just like, okay, enough. And the odd thing was, it listened to me, so it stopped. Okay. When I said enough, I'm like, I don't want to hear this anymore. I'm like, I want to just let me hear outside because I figured outside would be quieter.
Yeah.
So let me hear outside. Now, where we were at in Costa Rica, there's lots of monkeys in the background. So there was tons of monkeys going nuts in the background of this place. I heard the monkeys. It was as if the monkeys were in my head again, like pounding on themselves and yelling at each other and screaming and all that stuff. I was like, no, okay, I don't want this either. It instantaneously stopped. So I'm like, okay, I'm in control of this, whatever this is, which was kind of cool. And then it brought me back to the room. And I said, just bring me in the room and like keep quiet ultimately. And it resettled itself. I was still seeing things visually. And it was at that point where the nausea kicked in for the first time, and it didn't leave me until the next day. So this was like, it kicked in. I hate nausea.
Yeah.
I know you do too.
My Achilles heel.
Yeah. So the nausea kicked in, which was the most unpleasant part to it. But I assumed it was going to happen. I mean, there's a puke bucket next to your bed for a reason. So it kicked in, and I still hadn't drank the second part. And I'm like, pretty soon, if it doesn't get my turn again, I'm not going to be able to put more things down my throat.
Yeah,
so I was starting to get worked up about that.
Yeah.
And I looked, and I'm like, it felt like I had been on this thing for 2 hours, but realistically I hadn't because the line was still progressing, and she didn't move that slowly.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't even know how long this period of time was. But I was seriously concerned I was going to throw up before I can get the second portion. But enough time passed, got to me to do the second portion, and I remember I stood up. I saw our friend coming back, so it was my turn to get up. And as I was getting up, still very nauseous, I remember passing our friend, and I didn't see her. I saw her aura walking past me. So it was in the shape of a woman.
Yeah.
But it was just colors of her aura walking past me physically. And but again, my mind was working so slow. It couldn't be like, whoa, or something like that. It was literally just like, oh. And it just kept walking. It was like a zombie kind of walking towards the space, which was interesting. And then I sat down, same spot. And the shaman wasn't a person anymore. She was an aura. Hers looked like gorgeous. It was like awesome colors just going on. I remember it just was amazing. And she was talking to me, and this was a little bit of a comical moment. She's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm talking to your aura. I remember I said that to her. And then and a lot of this I confirmed when I spoke to her the next day.
Yeah.
But and she just kind of laughed or whatever. And then that's when we had the conversation I mentioned before about quantity. And she ended up giving me a normal size quantity from what I know.
Yeah.
So drank that, tasted just as terrible, went back to my bed, and the real part of the night, I guess, began at that point.
Right. So, you know, obviously it's very interesting in terms of like how things start to come about. I mean, the control over the fan and the monkeys and stuff is interesting. One thing that I guess questions of in terms of like, you know, you said you saw frequencies bouncing around the room, and, you know, sometimes we, when I've looked at a lot of experiences I've had myself, not through psychedelics, but in this sort of way, I mean, we see these things and, you know, we have all these ideas of what they are and like, oh my God, you know, there was this crazy thing. There was all these beings, there was always this, there was always that. And all these, you know, in your take, what were you seeing? Like, what did you see these frequencies as? Like, what did it represent to you?
To me, they were friendly. They weren't threatening in any means. They kind of just represented the overall cumulative energy to me of the people in the room or the space that we were creating.
Yep.
Whether it was something that the shaman was intentionally trying to put out there to create a space, or whether it's something that we just as a collective. I think anytime, like me and you in this room right now, are creating some type of a collective frequency that is bouncing around that we don't see at this point. But so I think it's just a collection of that probably was made a little bit more colorful and more pronounced because of the intention behind what was happening.
Right. In that, in essence, you know, that these things are always around, always bouncing around, you know. And if you looked a lot into the sort of the nature of our reality and quantum physics and so forth, and, you know, I guess the role of what we call the left brain a lot of the times, you know, in analyzing the energetics that is our space and then turning it into the solidity that we see, you know, this stuff starts to make a little bit more sense. But well, let's continue on the journey a little bit here. You know, you've now stated that you're going into the sort of the next level of the night. Second drink in, still haven't puked?
Still haven't puked. That took about 3 minutes after I had sat down. And then I was the first person in the room to puke. I had that stat confirmed afterwards.
Yeah.
It was within 3 minutes of sitting down. I felt like 3 minutes, or probably within 10 seconds. Who even knows?
Yeah.
Of sitting down. There were still people getting their second drink, and I was already yakking my brains out.
Yeah.
But and of course, you didn't eat a lot throughout the day. You only ate at breakfast, and it was very light, so you're mostly puking out bile and some of the drink that you just consumed, which is basically like tobacco tasting.
Yeah.
So it wasn't pleasant what you're doing. But it was part of the process. So I was puking pretty quick, and that's when more of the intense journeys began. For me, it started off with significant historical moments in this life. It took me back, like because I would wake up, puke in like a leaned over position over the bucket. Then I would lie back down because you're exhausted. Yeah. And like you're getting a little bit like the cold sweats too and all that shit that comes along with that crap. So it would be whenever I'd lie back down after it and kind of like almost try to go to sleep that I would end up going on little visions. So I remember like the first one I went on, it took me back to my high school to a particular moment that as soon as I was there, I recognized it. If you had asked me before the ceremony to recall that moment, I wouldn't. Right. Like it just wasn't a memorable thing that I regularly recalled as part of my high school life. But it stood out. And for me, I went back and I was there and I was in my body and I was listening to a conversation that was happening to me. And for me, it was a moment that as soon as I saw it again, was a trigger and a big key moment in my life that made me feel a hell of a lot more self-conscious and a hell of a lot more doubt in my abilities and my talents in life. Like I was confident about one particular thing. There was a figure of authority who told me otherwise in a joking sense, but it hit home. Right. And it's like stung to the max. And I felt it again when I re-experienced this moment that I'd forgotten about. Yeah. And it just like, it made my heart sink and made everything feel. So it was interesting to relive that. Yeah. And I remember being there and again, still having a bit of that control. And I was talking to myself or to the planet, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to call it. And I remember hearing within my own head, it's like, do you want to keep feeling this way? And I said, no. So I was like, okay, so let go. And I said, okay, I did. I got up and I puked. So back into the bucket, I was puking. So that experience kind of ended that way. Yeah. Then I would go on another trip. But there were some really harmless ones. There was ones that were just friendly little messages that wanted me to tell some other people that we were traveling with or people back home, just little things. So I saw like, oh, make sure you tell this person this or respect this thing for this person, but there's this message for them. So there were some of those along the way which weren't as intense. But whenever it was the ones about me where it took me back to points that were a little bit more intense, it always ended up with me puking over this stuff. Yeah. One of the more memorable ones I'll take you through, which for me is quite intense. I know you know well because we're good friends, but one of my biggest fears in life or one of the most traumatic fears was the movie The Ring. With the little girl, and namely for me, the thing that really stood out more than anything else was in the videotape that's said to be able to kill you or whatever that sends the girl after you. There's the older woman, the mother brushing her hair in the mirror. Yeah. Terrified me as a kid. It extra terrified me as a kid because I had the exact same mirror in my basement in my house. Right. So of course I'm like, why? Like this you know how many times as a kid I ran by that mirror in the nighttime? Like I couldn't stand it. Like I was afraid of my basement because of this movie and the irrational fear it created within me. That was one of my biggest fears. So here I am laying probably 10, 11 pukes into the night, and I'm laying there trying to keep my eyes closed, and I hear a voice in my head say, open your eyes. I was like, okay. And I'm just exhausted. And I open my eyes, and my eyes are fixated on this point, like where I see one of the assistant shamans, the one who had been helping me the most throughout the night. Every time I threw up, she'd come and help me out. So I recognized her. I saw her there, and I was just fixated on her with like this gaze that I couldn't break. I couldn't blink. I couldn't do anything anymore. And suddenly this woman starts like morph. Like her body starts like do like creepy shit from a horror movie. It starts like do all this bending and shit like that. And she became the woman that brushes her hair in the mirror from The Ring. And I remember in my head, I was just like, oh, we're going there. Like that's literally what I thought. But I couldn't overreact. I couldn't go nuts. I couldn't freak out. I couldn't go have an anxiety attack. Everything was moving too slowly. So I was staring at it and it was weird. And she was just there, and I had my eyes locked into this woman in the mirror staring at me while brushing her hair, and the mirror showed up in front of her too. So I was just staring at it, and I remember I'm like, why am I so afraid of this? And then it was like telling me, it's just like it just hits you at a sensitive point. Yeah. It doesn't have any ties to anything deeper. Yeah. It just hit you at a point. It had enough little things to feed it that it became a really intense fear. And I remember thinking, do you want to let this go? Yeah. And I'm like, yes, like this feels irrational and stupid. Yeah. So I let it go. I said yes. And as I did, again, over the bucket, puking, a very extensive puke. And again, this could have been visually tricking me or something like that. But I do remember looking into the bucket that time and the mix of bile and ayahuasca and whatever else was in my system coming out made to me what visually looked on this tripped out state as like a skull. In the base of it. And what's interesting is that it's a very clean place where we were doing it. So they switch out your bucket in between every puke. There's people kind of monitoring the space. Yeah. So it wasn't that my collection did that. It was that particular puke that to me in that moment, again, whether or not it actually was in that shape, I have no idea. But to me in that moment, it looked like a skull. Yeah. Like this extra little freaky feature to it. Yeah. So that was a fun one that happened. That was a nice little, again, still not the pinnacle of the evening. But not the pinnacle. it was a good one.
So pausing at that part then, I mean, I have, there's elements to what you described as that journey of and I know you probably know this too from the work that your dad does, and I've obviously done a lot of work with his dad as well, which we'll get into a little bit. That reminds me a lot of that sort of thing. But looking back at, and this is kind of the specific question, and this is I think the point of why we do these things. Do you feel that when you resaw the experience and you puked out for example, the self-conscious thing about that ability when you were going back to that high school thing, how is that translated in terms of your life moving forward?
It helped, but you still need to do work afterwards. It's not like magically everything disappears. Suddenly I'm confident again. There's no whatever. It's not like I magically don't have any fears anymore. Like I wouldn't consciously watch The Ring for fun. Just like that's I don't.
Well, unless your foot was ready there.
Yeah, it's ready to kick the girl. But so I'm not saying it magically dissipated these things. Right. It was one way to instigate moving beyond something.
Right. And so in your eyes, then moving beyond something, what does that look like afterwards? Because you've experienced a different reaction to it, your mind doesn't as instantaneously react in the way it used to. Right.
So before, the mind had so much programming built into everything within you that when you saw a little trigger that made you think of the girl from The Ring, it freaks out. It breaks all those. It brings you back to step one. It's not that those are gone forever, but there's like a decision point as to whether or not you want to break that down there. And I think that stems back to what you were talking about a little while ago, where people go do these ceremonies, they feel good for 2-3 weeks or whatever the case may be. But if you don't do the consistent work, if you don't make the consistent choice to not read, you can easily slip back to the exact same state you were in before. Yeah.
So, I mean, when we say the work, because I've had this question asked to me many times, because, I'll say, hey, you got to do the work, specifically, like, you don't have to get super personal if you don't like, but in terms of the high school experience of the self-conscious and when you say do the work on that, like what does that look like moving beyond the ceremony? So it's 2-3 weeks down the road and, suddenly you're feeling a little bit self-conscious about something that relates to that. What does that work begin to look like?
Different reaction to like the observation. Of course, there was triggers beyond that point that would make me feel self-conscious, whether it be things like an experience that happened or just me leading up to something that would make me feel that way or start to doubt myself. It's how I would react to those feelings. So instead of letting it go down the same path, I would remember it's like, hey, this is not true. It's not. It doesn't have to go that way. The stories I've been telling myself to this point that used to work wonders on me are an option now.
Right.
It's like, and they were always an option, but I had ingrained them so heavily they didn't feel like an option.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like just a reminder that it is an option. It is just something fickle from this. It just hit you at a certain point. It's up to you if you want to attach that to this thing, which actually has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's all of our past experiences help to make us into who we are today.
Right.
But your past experiences don't enslave you to be a particular way.
Right.
So if you've been self-conscious for X number of years, but suddenly you look at it differently, that doesn't mean you need to be self-conscious for the rest of your life. The next moment, you can suddenly work beyond that or not let it enslave you anymore.
Absolutely.
It's just a matter of making choices in opposition to that, which this helped me to realize that. But again, it was just, so the consistent work is just staying true to what you now were reminded of.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the idea of stepping out of like the victimhood of the experience. And I think this kind of leads to point number one of one of the things and one of the reasons behind this podcast is the idea of, you hear so much, or at least I do, and I mean, let's be honest, it's all over the internet, it's all over all these things, people talking about how, hey, you see the experience when you're on ayahuasca, you puke it out, and then it's gone, and then it's done, and then you're like free of it, and a big part of the challenge that I've witnessed, because I've witnessed people who've done ayahuasca once, and I've witnessed people who've done ayahuasca 30-40 times, and in a lot of cases they're dealing with the same thing they were on session 1 as they are in session 40. And in some cases people get worse. And the point is it's not that experience is suddenly just, okay, it's done, it's done all the work for you. And I think that's sentiment number one that needs to begin to shift if we're going to, bring grounding to this entire subject is, this medicine, as it's often called all the time, which, whatever, you can call it whatever you like. That's totally cool. It doesn't do all the work for you, right? And, there's a lot of focus now that's happening on integration, which is great, which is starting to talk about what to do afterwards and this, that, whatever. So that's helpful, I think. But there's still so much of the experience and what is causing so much expectation and so much a lack of understanding around it is this idea of like, oh yeah, it's done. You do it and then you're free.
Yeah.
Yet, when I talk to people who are more grounded like yourself or who have kind of like done the deeper work beyond it, it always is the same story. No. The journey starts afterwards when you start utilizing the experience. And it sort of leads to the question then of like, have you had experiences in your life where you were able to sort of see the same insight in whether it be an experience, in a sober sense, in a meditation, and whatever it may be?
Yeah, part of this I don't want to spoil because it comes up in a later part of it. And I think I told you about this in the previous conversation, but I did have a bit of a conversation. Yes. With ayahuasca, if you want to call it that. Yeah. So that where some of this does come up. Yeah. But just to kind of touch on a little bit of what you said, I can only speak from my own experience of it with concrete evidence, but because it's so profound in the sense of it's visually stimulating, it's sensorially stimulating, and then you do something as physically intense as throwing up is. I mean, when you throw up, you throw up. That's something you're not doing anything else. You're not thinking while you're throwing up. You're just throwing up because it takes everything from you. It can feel revolutionary. It can feel like it's good, like it makes a massive difference, and it does. It's an instigator, and it's also, chemically, physically. Like think about I've thrown up tons of times as a kid, right? Endorphins happen, adrenaline happens. You feel great afterwards. Like everybody talks about the experience of like, oh my god, I finished throwing up. I feel amazing, right? Yeah, that happens. It's normal, right? Whether you're sick or whether you're on the thing. So it's definitely an instigator, but I can say from my experience, it was just an instigator. You still had to do stuff after to cement this stuff in place, and even that, it's a continual process. It's not that you can get to some point where you're invincible to self-consciousness, for example. There's always things are going to come up in different forms that can trigger it in different ways. It was just an instigator that created a very sensorial experience that allowed me to see it different. So for some people, it can be really beneficial and really, if to help them look at something completely different, kind of forces it upon you, but it's not the be all and end all from my experience of it. Yeah, and I think the sort of the truth and understanding here is, because I've explored many journeys into this sort of insight, and as of you, and I've spoken to tons of people over, is there is no one be all end all, right? And that's the point, and is it's like so much of this is a journey, and whether you gain insight through meditation or through something else or whatever it may be, I think at the end of the day, what we're working towards is self-empowerment, and we'll get there, get there, but there's another point here which we'll get to as we go, but let's continue on with the story then. Okay. Yeah, there's two main highlights left, I would say. One that's just kind of like a very interesting experience, and then there's the main thing which I think will offer the biggest takeaway for this. Yeah. And really touch on a lot of the things you've brought up. But the first one, which was kind of just a very intense experience, which I'll share just because it's very interesting, this was well into the night. I don't know how many times. I felt like I'd been puking like 30, 40 times this night. It was just crazy. It was still going on, still consistent nausea even after you puke. So it was no relief. You're just exhausted. And I remember I was leaned over my bucket again, just throwing up. And every other time prior to this time, when I was throwing up, my eyes wouldn't close. Like other than the moment of it, your eyes would be forced to look at what you're throwing up. Right. So they wouldn't close like a typical puke, at least from my experience. But this time I had puked and I was so exhausted. Like my eyes just collapsed. Like I felt like I was like weight over this bucket, just like, I can't do this anymore. Like I am so drained. And it took me like a minute or two, but I opened my eyes and I wasn't in the ceremony space anymore. I was in like a dungeon. So the space around me had completely changed. And I remember just like, again, I was calm. I wasn't freaking out. I wasn't like, oh my, what the hell's happening? Like the mind doesn't work that way. It was just like, what the hell is going on? I remember looking around and there was like chains on the wall of this dungeon, which was much smaller than the actual ceremony space we were in. Yeah. So it was like it shrunken the space down. And there were two guys like a couple of feet away from me talking amongst each other. And I was still on my hands and knees, the same position I was actually in puking. But I was looking around, I looked at the chains and I looked down and I noticed that my arms weren't mine. They were arms of an African-American male. That's what they were. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? This is interesting. And I remember feeling tired, just like I actually was from the nausea and all that stuff like that. But I felt like I had like a smashing headache all of a sudden. Yeah. I tasted blood in my mouth. And my eyes were like starting to feel like really blurry / drowsy. So like things were just getting like more intense than they actually were in my real reality. And I remember just tripping out. And I was looking up at those guys and they were somewhat blurry. And I heard them talking. And I knew that they were going to come and continue to beat me. Like they were beating the shit out of me ultimately in this reality. That to me, and again, this is off of my own experience. I know you have similar beliefs in this regard, at least I think still. But for me, I process this as a past life.
Right.
That's what I saw it as. So it felt like that, and I felt like my mind processed that. So it was engaging in that. So I saw this as a past life, and I was just there, and I knew that these guys were beating the crap out of me for a while, and they were going to continue doing it. And I remember being afraid of it, but not really. Like I've had this moment where they were getting ready to come and start kicking me again or start doing any type of beating, and I saw a childlike figure appear in front of me, and I remember it had taken the shape of my niece.
Yeah.
But it wasn't her. I wasn't processing at her, but it looked like her.
Right.
And I just recognized it as a child, and seeing this child gave me this strength. And I remember starting to laugh, and I was talking to these two figures in the room, and I said, you can keep doing whatever you want to do to me, but you're not going to be able to kill me because I'm choosing to go back to her. So it was like I was overriding their ability to kill me.
Right.
Because I had this strength in me that wasn't going to let anything they were going to do actually kill me.
Right.
So it was like I was like laughing, and that pissed them off. And I remember one of the guys turning around at that point, and I remember him stomping towards me, and I see this boot coming right towards my head, like a military type boot, and it was coming to kick me right in the face. And I was just prepared for it, and I was completely stoic in the face of this boot coming to my face. And just as it was about to get there,
It stopped.
puked again into the bucket. I was still in the all fours position, back into the room, puking my brains out. I was just like, wow, interesting. Like, but for me, like, go ahead.
I just have a question. So even some of what you're describing, like I mean, I think about dreams and experiences like insanely vivid that, that I've had, and I'm sure many of us have had. Did it feel like that at all?
It did, because I've also had pretty intense dreams that I would definitely correlate with past lives of some capacity. Yeah. But the difference was the physical sensation to it. The fact that I was able to process enough that this was going on. I even had a moment where I processed this as a past life. I tend to find in the dreams, it's when I wake up and I think about it, I process it that way. Versus this, it was like real life experience of a past life again that I was able to do a little bit more presence in. And I felt like my arms on the floor, versus dreams are a little bit more fluid, like at least in my experience. From this, it was like I had that there. I remember being physically there. I remember the taste of blood. I remember the pain of the headache, the smashing headache. All that. Like, so that was a bit more intense than a dream. I haven't had a dream where I've had tasting blood from my recollection. So it was a bit more sensorially stimulating, I would say. But similar in the sense of I've delved into things like that before, at least I feel. Yeah.
Interesting. So you're back to puking, you're back to going through this thing, releasing this one, and then, was there any relief? Like, was there any end of puking here? Was there any, or did that journey continue for you? Oh, and then also, was there any number 2 for you? Because I know for a lot of people it's double-ended. How was your experience on that side?
I didn't have any number 2.
Well, there
was nothing like that. Thankfully. I wouldn't want that happening as well. Yeah. I don't think anyone in the room did. I don't think anyone heard talking about that. Oh, but I definitely didn't have that. But there was still puking in store. Yeah. There was the big puke after that. And at that point, first off, the experience of that was cool for me in the sense of like it made me feel a strength. Yeah. In the sense of like I consciously choose my reality to some degree, way more than I felt like I believed before. So that was kind of cool. But then at that point, honestly, like I was so tired, so burnt out, so sick of being nauseous. And at this point, like I was starting to somewhat come back into reality a little bit. I don't know how many hours had passed into the ceremony at this point. I suddenly got way more ballsy than I ever am in reality. And I'm just like, this is where I wanted answers. Yeah. So I decided to seek them. I felt like everything I was asking for was coming to me pretty clearly. Yeah. That it was time for me to get some answers I was looking for. So I remember...
I feel like this is the climax of the movie right now.
This is the climax.
I'm starting to get nervous for the main character. I'm like, what's going to happen?
Yeah, just also as a little side note before I get there, because there was another point in one of the lighter parts of the evening where I felt like I was able to ask questions. Like I saw this... like what I defined as like my intuition. I just saw like this friendly figure sitting on like a wooden throne. And I remember asking it questions and it would give me answers. So it would like branch out and there'd be like a little flower. It would say yes or no. So it was like I had that opportunity. Of course, in that moment, I couldn't think of any of the questions I actually wanted answered. I remember asking stupid things. But
like, will the Blue Jays win the World Series?
Yes. Yeah. Things like that. They didn't.
They did not.
But so that was like I felt like answers were available to me. Right. So I was sick and tired of it. And I remember laying back down after that time where I was in the past life. I laid down. I'm like, enough is enough. And I remember saying, like, not physically out loud in the room, but I remember saying within my own space of that experience, I want to talk to you. and I was firm. Like I was just firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking out into the space, and the space we were in had like dark wood floors. It was a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And as soon as I said that, I saw some of the floorboards start to move. And like from the dark wood floorboards, there was a tree started to grow into the space.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to branch up as if there was no other people in the space. I just saw this tree visually showing itself. And this tree started to create itself with all these different vines coming out of it. And it was a normal looking tree, but in the center of it, it had like a feminine body. Mm-hmm. So it had like the curvature of a woman with a bit of the aura type coloring that I saw in the shaman earlier.
Right.
So I saw this thing for me. So for me, I processed it as like, this is me talking to the thing that we're playing with tonight, that the shaman has integrated into play. You can call it, like it's, I would say, and when I've shared it to other people, it's like, oh, you were talking to Mama Ayahuasca.
Right.
If you want to call it that, sure.
Yeah. Because many people have described a similar type thing when talking to Mama Ayahuasca.
Yeah. So if it felt like that, I saw this thing visually in front of me, and here I was, as if like there was nothing going to hold me back. I was literally like being a bit of a prick with her. But I remember she took form, and I was watching her take form, giving her time to do that, and everything looked normal except I saw her face, which was like a tree-like face, but it looked incredibly sad, and it was like it looked like it was crying to a certain degree, and I processed that. And she was just there. She didn't say anything at first. And I'm like, listen, this has been very cool in the sense of like, I'm seeing a lot of very interesting things. I'm getting a lot of really cool experiences from this. And like this I can see why people do this. But I said, and I was very blunt, I said, going through this with this much nausea, with this much puking, with this much fatigue, with this much headache, with everything going on, just seems stupid.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
I'm
like, this just seems like a really stupid way to get to this stuff.
Yeah.
So, and it's like, I said it. I was just blunt and tired. So when you're exhausted, you just say things, right?
Yeah.
I literally just said that. And the first thing that she said to me, which was an interesting little point, she said, first off, it's extra intense for you tonight because you have a little bit of a sunstroke. That's what she said.
Okay.
So I had that, I guess, from the day of being out in the Costa Rican sun. So I guess that might have contributed a little bit to the excess puking because I definitely out-puked the party.
Yeah.
So she did say that.
Yeah.
And I remember I just like chuckled at that idea. It made a bit more sense because I was a little feverish for sure. And that's what the shaman even told me after. She would be regularly checking my forehead because I was quite feverish. So that certainly intensified some of the physical elements, I'm sure. But so she started with that. And then she said that's a little bit of what's going on, but she said she's sad, and I said, okay, why are you sad? She wasn't necessarily answering my question, and she said, so I decided to delve into her issues to a certain degree. I'm like, why are you sad? And she said, because I'm being ruined.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the exact wording at this, but I wrote it all down. I wrote like a little bit of an ebook just in case I ever want to do anything with it, where it's more in depth. But she talked about how she feels like she's being ruined. And overused and westernized, and she was saying all these different things, and she said that in fact she doesn't even participate in too many of the ceremonies that take place anymore because she's getting tired of being misused.
Right.
So it's very draining for her, and I understood in the sense of that because from my perspective, I know that these ceremonies happen daily all over the world, in multiple places, and I can't imagine. Like, I'm sure. In some places, very genuine. I'm sure in some places it's not done as well, whatever the case may be. I'm not going to judge what this one was. It was its own place that provided good experience. But so I know it's being used a lot. It's being kind of overused. And she was expressing that concern in the sense of like, I'm being torn apart. I can't even be present in all these different things. And she told me pretty soon, if it doesn't change, I'm going to completely dissipate from the process.
Yeah.
So she said, there's going to continue to be psychedelic properties to the plant.
Yeah.
There'll always be that. So people can do this, but she's going to stop participating. And she's the one who instigates the beneficial parts, if you want to say it, at the conscious level, or all the different processing that way. She was going to check out of it at some point soon because she was tired of being misused. And she went on to tell me that this was designed for people with a certain intensity of experience that really came across this, and it needed to do some substantial work. Another thing she clearly presented to me was that it was not designed to be done more than once by an individual, except in extreme circumstances. Yeah. And they would know it in that scenario. So the whole idea of people who go do this bi-weekly or bi-annually or whatever, it didn't jive with the Mama Ayahuasca that was talking to me. It was just bastardizing it to a certain degree. So she was very sad by this, and she was telling me that it's going to check out. And I was like, I felt that sympathy within me, in the sense of like, I understand that, because there's a reason why this never really jived with me personally, because like it just didn't seem like this a logical way to get answers. Yeah. And now having experienced it, this seemed like a really non-logical way to get answers.
For sure.
Because I had gotten some of these insights, like we talked about before, from other things.
Yeah.
Did they take a hell of a lot more work than something that's like a quick fix? Yes, but that's like the nature of our society.
Absolutely.
Our society is looking for quick fixes to everything, right? That's why pharmaceuticals are power, like we mask symptoms rather than get to the root of the problem.
We're just pharmaceuticaling nature right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like I fully sympathize with her, and I forgot about my question of like the frustration. I felt like a love with this thing and I remember saying like, should I tell people this? Mm-hmm. And she's like, yes, please, but it probably won't make a difference.
Right.
Because she knew it was past like the critical mass point. Mm-hmm. Where it's not like me going out and saying this on a podcast or saying it, even if I got on some massive show or something, it's not going to shut down the whole industry.
People are still going to do it, yeah.
Right? So I have no idea if she's since checked out from then, or if she's still engaged in Sprott, or certain ones where it's really genuine, or whatever the case may be. But it resonated with me, and that stood out to me as the highlight of the night that I never anticipated.
Right.
But it was something that I commanded. It felt really genuine to me. And it was something that I went on to share with not only my friends who were there, but even with the shaman the day after. And she understood it, surprisingly. Like she still, I'm sure, practices this stuff. Yeah. I wouldn't assume she should have packed up shop, but she completely understood.
Yeah.
And she talked about why even she only does it at a certain frequency. She's not there doing it every night.
Yeah.
And why she does it in her own way, because she feels like she needs to get guidance of a way to do it so that it still does something.
Right.
So she has to do her own work to keep her process of it, I guess, more pure. But she fully was not thrown off by what I said, which was basically ripping apart her potential industry, if you want to call it that.
For sure. And you know, I mean, the interesting side to this is you know, the idea that, you know, you're not the first person I've heard this from. And I mean, I've gained my own clarity on this through meditation and through different feelings as well. And I know even, you know, speaking to your dad, he's said different things. And you know, it's come up in so many different ways all over the place. And I think this is kind of, again, that interesting factor of like, you know, where it's not working on a lot of people, right? Some people are, you know, getting worse. Like I've had, I mean, one of the most, I guess you could say, profoundly relevant or revealing moments, even for me, in terms of the effect ayahuasca, when it's absent, can have on people. I mean, was that time when we were at Rhythmia and one of our friends had done it, and after the ceremony, he was sheer darkness. And when I say that, I don't mean like darkness, evil, oh my God, blah blah. It was. He was in a moment where his ego was solely in control, and there was this oddness going on, and I'm witnessing it, right? Because it was the first time I had been around an immediate experience afterwards, which is part of, you know, what I gained so much from Rhythmia in that regard, is being able to see that and being able to see kind of the energies of like how the energy would change at night when ceremonies were taking place and stuff. And you know, part of grounding this subject and really talking about it and really going into it is, you know, and I don't think you just mentioned it, but you were saying something, you were touching on the fact of, you know, it's for specific cases. And, you know, the insight I always received, and you tell me if this is kind of what you got from the situation, was that, you know, for people that struggle extremely with addiction, or people that have had a traumatic experience that might be just, you know, absolutely traumatic, right? You know, something like this can be very helpful. But for the average person, it's pretty well completely unnecessary. And while you could get something out of it, absolutely, it goes back to the whole idea of like, you know, if the plant is looking to essentially check out, you know, what at what point as humans do we have to take responsibility for our own journey here? You know, and this is kind of like the fascinating part of it, and why I'm so passionate about the message of grounding this subject is ayahuasca is a being. Do you know what I mean? The ability for this plant to even work, I mean, there's a being that is operating. And in classic Western philosophy, we are destroying that being in a sense, right? We're abusing it in the way we abuse Mother Earth.
Yep.
And to me, this is a fascinating revelation that is just not talked about. And it's kind of sad, you know, because, you know, here we are again where it's like, you always hear about the crazy, trippy experience that took place, but we don't hear that, hey, the first 30 times it didn't work. We don't hear that, you know, this person committed suicide a week later because blah, 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 blah. You know, the integration wasn't good enough. You don't hear about the whole story, you know, and this is what I'm fascinated with, right? You know, is this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, you touched upon something that I would definitely equate it with the whole idea of the abuse of the earth. It's very similar. where it does have a power. It's just like the earth is a beautiful place that has so much going for it. It's a place that we're all lucky to be a part of, but we are abusing it just like we love to do in this world for whatever reason. So this is very much that way. I do think when I got that message from her, I do think, like you said, there are extreme cases where it is beneficial. The people who really cannot, by whatever means in their life, cannot get to the root of something that's really deep within them. I think it can be beneficial for that. Even just seeing from my own experience of showing me things that I'd forgotten about or taking me places that I would have never probably gone otherwise. So it can be beneficial for that. But I think it's more concerning when you have people going to it for a trip or going to it expecting something grandiose to come from it, or going to it as another form of addiction where you're going to it regularly. That's where I can see things creeping in, because then you develop this dependency on something, and it can actually do a disservice at that point.
Right.
Where now you completely disempower yourself from being able to do anything personally, because you figure I'll clean it all up when I go to ayahuasca on this date then. Right? So it can get to that point. I'm sure, and I get the feeling that it's done a lot of good for a lot of people in this world.
Yep. Well, it definitely has.
Yeah. So, and I don't mean to belittle what they've gone through by any means. So it's something that, believe it or not, I'm grateful I went through. Would I ever do it again? Not a shot. But I don't think for majority of humanity it's necessary route to go there. And I would love to see, although I don't know what it would take to get humanity to a point where they do the work otherwise, because it's not particularly easy. It's not popping a pill and something happens, right? And that's where platforms like Collective Evolution come in, or anything else that's out there to try and get people to do the self-improvement work or the personal development work, whatever you want to call it, because that's where the true change comes from, and that's where the true altering of your reality comes from, rather than anything out there. These can be a tool to help you recognize that, depending on where you're at personally before you do these things, but I worry more about the people who go there with either expectations based off of someone who told them it was like some crazy trip, which I can say it can be a crazy trip. That was crazy what I went on, but I would never promote that to someone like, go do that because look what you're going to go through. Right? And I remember even when I was telling my brother-in-law about that, he's like, I got to go do this. I'm like, let me get to the end of the story. because like it sounds like cool, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's even, I mean, I've through breathing, I've had full out-of-body experiences that resemble the exact same stuff that people talk about in this. I would never tell someone, go do breathing to have a full out-of-body experience. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't be like, hey, that's the purpose of breath work, is to go have this crazy like trip. And you know what I mean? And I think this is part of the point, is it's like we start to get a little bit more excited about and concerned with the idea of escaping the reality before us that we're uncomfortable with, so as to have an experience that's like, wow, that was trippy and that was great. But you know, again, is that the purpose? Is that why we're here? And how is that going to advance our civilization or advance us as humans, as souls moving forward, right? Yeah. And so the question really becomes, and what I want to get to here is a very important piece, but, you know, the question really becomes is like, you know, what is your purpose for wanting to do it and so forth? What is the reason why that, you know, this is what people have to think about. Why would you want to do breath work? Why would you want to go to some psychic? Why would you want to go do ayahuasca? Why do you want, what is your intention? And, you know, so for people that are thinking about doing ayahuasca, right? I mean, in no way have I ever said to somebody, don't do it. Don't, you know what I mean?
I wouldn't do that either.
And you wouldn't do that either. And because I truly believe it comes down to check within your heart and determine, you know, what to do. So how would you, you know, maybe drawing from some of the experience of how you eventually decided, how would you guide someone to really decide if this is something that is just pure curiosity or because everyone's doing it? Because in California right now, ayahuasca is so trendy, everyone's doing it constantly. But for the authenticity, you know, how do we get there?
First thing I would ask anybody is, for, like you said, why are you doing it? And then what if I told you that what you're going to get from it is not going to be the be all and end all of fixing whatever that reason is? If there's going to be work after it, are you still interested in doing it?
Right.
And I mean legitimate work afterwards.
Yes, legitimate. Yeah.
So it's like, if someone really has some definitive reason that stands out as something they're looking for a solution with, that they've tried other things or they just feel like they're lost about, and they recognize that this is not going to be a quick fix. This is not going to just be the solution that they're going to puke and suddenly it's all gone, or suddenly that traumatic experience is going to dissipate into their reality. If you're ready to do that and you know that there's going to be work afterwards and you're going to commit to that, then sure, and you feel that within your heart. The heart guidance, of course, is key. Then you go ahead and do that. But if you're doing this because it sounds cool, to fit in, because everyone's doing it,
Yeah.
or because you like trippy experiences, or because you want to just see what it has to show you, that type of thing. Really, like, what's the point of doing that? It's like, get over the lure of that. Realize that a lot of if it is as trendy as you're saying in like California, it's business as well to some people, so it's being made to seem even cooler.
For sure.
And I would be concerned about ones that are making it strictly a business off of that, because it's from a different energy rather than genuinely looking to help people.
Yeah.
So I would always do your research on that end as well.
For sure.
But yeah, realize that it's not the solution. It is a step, one of the potential steps towards a solution. It's not the only way to get to things, from my experience. But if you do decide to go that way, realize it's not the be all end all. There's more that comes after it, and it's just a very intense stepping stone.
Yeah. I mean, puking. I mean, that was one of my big things when I was researching psychedelics back in the day. I was like, man, these things, it seems very interesting. It's intriguing. And it was a beginning part of my journey where, I'm meditating, I'm doing things, I'm playing around with stuff, but I'm not having any insane sort of quote unquote experiences. And that's part of the lure and this is an interesting part of the culture too, is when we, in the spiritual world or in this whole community, we talk about whether it be meditation or whether it be breathwork, all these sorts of things from the standpoint of this crazy thing. And not only does it make us feel less than that we're not experiencing it, but then we go down this path of like, oh my God, I must be broken. There must be something wrong. Like, I'm not having these like crazy, massive out of body, like all these different things. Mm-hmm. When I meditate, I'm not seeing Archangel Michael come and tell me all these things. Mm-hmm. We all have different experiences. And at the end of the day, go back to it. What is the purpose for why we're doing what we're doing? And what is our purpose for being here, right? Which is to grow, evolve, move forward, and shift. And in a lot of cases, whether Mike Angel comes and gives you daps or not, it's not really going to, it's not the difference as to whether or not, you're going to evolve and shift, right? And so I guess too, it's like from your perspective. I mean, I'm trying to pull out a message too, and for those of us that have done, ayahuasca or have done psychedelics too, and I believe there's a learning process in how we share our experiences with one another too. And part of what I've observed that I want to shift, and I want to see if you have like advice that you would be able to give here. But part of what I'd love to see shift is the sort of mentality of misleading everyone else into this idea of you got to do it and you got, you know what I mean? Like, this is the only way, because I do believe that's harmful, and I do believe it's not necessarily the best thing to be sharing. If we had a greater awareness about what we could share, it would be great to share that. So, how would you advise that people can share their experience or share how to, talk to other people, given, the way I'm sure you talk about it?
I think it comes down to respecting everybody's life is completely different than yours. If you are someone who's done it before and had a profound experience, a positive experience, something that you really like, it was life-changing for you, which I'm not going to say it wasn't. If it was, it was awesome. Recognize that was your experience of it, and it's not going to be guaranteed to be the same way for everybody else. So don't promote it as you need to do this because it does this. Just because it did that for you doesn't mean it's going to do that for everybody else.
Right.
You can say it from your own experience. It provided me for this. But I would also even encourage that person to think back, now I'm sure a little bit removed from when they've done it, to think of, if they really have gone beyond X issue, Y issue, Z issue, how many of those were just magically disappeared, or were they the work that came afterwards that allowed you to get to that point? So give credit to where credit's due, not just to the soul experience and the flash and glitz that come along with it. Be honest about that with everyone, that there is work that comes along with it, and then to tell people that to take it from your experience, and anyone who's considering it to remember that that's their experience of it. It's not, there is no guarantee with it. So really to be a critical thinker and to realize that you're going to get exactly what you need from it, and to not be going with it. Because a lot of this even stems from like the ego. The ego likes to like brag about its most expansive experience or crazy experience. So this is easily something to brag about. This is something that if I wanted to, I can easily tell a great story at every party I go to about this. I don't tell it everywhere I go. I told a handful of people. I'm saying it here today, but I haven't said this story in a couple of years, or a year now. And so it's like, it's easy to get caught up in telling people how cool it is. And if you don't complete the story and everything that actually came from it, it can be very misleading. So to think of the story you're telling, and to think of the perspective that people can be taking from it. So be completely clear with it. Share everything about it. and what it led to, and not focusing so much on the cool aspects. I could easily tell the version of my story that only told the cool shit or the really intense shit, and I'm pretty sure I could motivate a couple hundred people to go do ayahuasca in the next couple of years, right?
Right.
But that would be a disservice.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. There's a joke that, I mean, Ruby and I have it. I demand accuracy. That's something that I live by so strong. And I don't do it from a standpoint of like, you know, oh, you fucking lying to me? Like, I'm going to kill you. You know, it's not like that. It's more so, I believe authenticity, if we really want our world to change, you know, authenticity and genuineness is so utterly important. And, you know, when we're authentic and when we're genuine and we're honest and when we're just accurate about our experiences, we can provide so much insight, lessons, everything for human beings. It's unbelievable. You know, we forget that we have the ability through what our brothers and sister humans are experiencing. We have the ability to, you know, in essence, not have to go through it ourselves because we're able to learn from them, right? And we're able to understand what they're going through. You know, there's so much that can be taken from hearing someone's story, you know, and then looking back at our own self-consciousness, if that's particularly an issue we share, and say, hey, you know what? Maybe it is the stories I'm telling. You know, why do we necessarily have to know where it pinpointed when in reality it's more so the lesson sometimes that needs to sort of be there, right? And so that, you know, that's another thing to think about. So yeah, I mean, I demand accuracy is so key. And again, part of the motivation behind the podcast is really just, I've personally felt, I mean, being in this space, I always get I cannot believe you haven't done psychedelics sort of thing. Like, how could you be the founder of this and you haven't done it? Like, I always get that. And it's like, that's okay. You know, I get it. I hold my space. I do my own thing. That's no problem. But what I've been noticing, what I've been seeing is this specific message. And I'm just like, you know what? I know you personally, and I hear the message you're sharing, and you're not even close to sharing the full story. And that's not fair to these other people that you're then convincing to do whatever it may be. It doesn't matter whether it's this or whether it's anything else. You can't tell someone this, and this because you're hiding the rest of it. And so, you know, the whole thing has to be there. And I think that's important. But, yeah, I mean, anything else at the end of it? It's been, how long has it been? A year and a bit?
I can't remember when we went. We went, I think it was December, right?
Yeah, so like a year and a half.
A year and a bit. Yeah, a year
and a half,
5 months or whatever the hell it is.
And you know, I mean, what's the, like? I mean, we've shared a lot, but is there anything else that, like, you know?
Not too much to it. I would just say everything like that I was able to address or bring up, you would say, within the ceremony, it wasn't magically gone, like I talked a little bit about before. I still have some irrational fears, and I still have some self-consciousness. I still have some of the other things I was able to look at. But like I said, I've just been able to do the work for something that I've always considered myself relatively proactive in doing anyway. But so it's been a bit of a journey that way. It still, again, is something that I feel I'm grateful to have gone through.
Yeah, for sure.
I would never do it again. I would never promote anyone to do it. But I would also never tell anyone don't do it.
Right.
Like, it's more so respect.
Got to make
look
your
within.
decision.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you, I do get concerned when I see people promoting it in a sense of like just blindly saying you have to do it.
This is the answer to everything.
Yeah. I'm glad it was an answer for that person. They feel so profoundly for it, and I don't discredit their experience of it. But just be careful of who you're telling it to in that capacity. And I don't like seeing anything getting westernized to a certain degree because it always scares me.
Well, and that goes back to the whole thing. And this is, again, the history that a lot of people don't realize. Like, I have some good friends who do a lot of work in the space of ancient cultures and when it comes to plant medicines and so forth, which are herbs too, by the way. This is another big thing. You know, plant medicine is a term sort of hijacked by the psychedelic community, and not in a negative way, but in a way to help not make it sound, you know, like previous connotations like psychedelics, which has its own party-ish type thing. But, you know, plant medicines are plant medicines. They're anything that is an herb, a botanical that can be there. And you know, going back to we were talking about the pharmaceutical side of how we're pharmaceuticaling things, it's like, you know, we'll often share the idea that nature is here, like, you know, the plant is there so that we can awaken. And it's like, that's like saying that, you know, like parsley's there so that we can get sick as much as we want irresponsibly and then use parsley to like save us every time we irresponsibly do something. The plant isn't there to help us awaken because we are going about being living our lives irresponsibly, choosing not to do the work, choosing not to develop a practice, choosing not to look at things. The plant's there so that, hey, you're in a really tough spot. There's not much, I don't know how else to help you. Like, there's not much you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Turn to nature as a thing that provides this thing that could help you in that process. And we need to look at it in that manner if we want to maintain harmony within it. And that's kind of like this, I think, this overarching theme that's just so important in this age of popularity growing around this.
Yep. But, yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that I'm sure you've had happen in your life that were so adamant about how cool they were, how much they healed you, or how much.
Tamagotchis.
Yeah. Or how awesome they were. You're not going to go rationally claiming that everyone needs to have a Tamagotchi because it was so profound for you, right? You could tell people around you it was cool, but you would tell them the full experience. And if you told them the full experience, the Tamagotchi got pretty boring pretty quick, right? It wasn't the be-all and end-all of entertainment in life.
Yeah.
So it's almost like liking it even to let's say someone, like almost like a parent with their kids, right? Where the dad, I'm going to equate it to baseball because I know we both like baseball. Mm-hmm. So a dad discovers how good baseball is. He never gets to make it to the big leagues. He discovers it in his late 30s. And he therefore loves the sport so much that he forces it upon his son.
Right.
Because he's like, this sport is the greatest thing ever. You need to do this sport. So he forces it upon him as a child. Everyone knows that's not a healthy thing to do.
Right.
So why would we think that doing this is a healthy? Just because you discovered it and it worked for you, you're not going to go force it upon anybody. That's just forcing anything is unhealthy. So why would you promote something in a way that does seem like a force to a certain degree?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, it's this type of wisdom that, comes from like just a regular daily practice to know, hey, it's sort of like with the shaman with you. She was like, I'm going to utilize my wisdom and judgment to know how to take you about this experience. And I believe we need to provide that same, insight when we're choosing to do these things as well as because like I say, I cannot deny the fact that there's only a small percentage, maybe 5 or 10% of stories that I've heard of psychedelic stories where the person has authentically and actually changed. I'm talking like a month, 2 months, 3 months after the experience. Yes, everybody's very excited for the first week, but I started to have this growing concern. I'm like, wait, why aren't people? Why isn't this sticking? Why isn't this changing? Right? Yep. And again, this is where that wisdom comes in. And the last little reminder that I want to bring home and sort of, get your take on too. And I don't know if this came up at all in the experience or just what your thoughts are on, because we talk about the shift a lot, or we talk about these different things, but, I feel personally that energetically the time is ripe on this planet to easily make shifts and adjustments in your life. Mm-hmm. It almost even seems to be happening at a we'll say a more popular level, in the sense of, personal development's like fairly popular. Yep. Reflecting on oneself these are ideas that are very popular now. That the energy of the planet seems so supportive for you to take action on making changes in your life. Yep. Even making it even less of a necessity to have to do something insanely taxing to go forward with it. What are your thoughts and feelings on that?
I agree with you with the ripe statement. It's definitely, just even thinking of like my own dad's experience, and he talks about not even that long ago, we're talking 20, 30 years ago, to be into any of this stuff, aside from the really businessy side of personal development, like Tony Robbins type stuff, it was very non-existent. Yeah. If you meditated, you were an oddball. And it's not to say that meditation didn't exist, but it existed in a certain culture, very isolated from the majority of the world. Now it's like it's openly supported that there's even the concern of it being too westernized and made into a cult, in the sense of like, oh, now you're hippie, or now you're like doing yoga because whatever, all these X reasons. So that's how big it's gotten. Right. But there really is a great time to do these things, where if you want to get into meditation, for example, not only is it something that people actively do. I know very few people that when you tell them you meditate nowadays go like that's very free. I know some people that back in the day would have definitely done that. Oh yeah. But now they meditate. Yeah. Right. So it's like the world is into it. I think even like mainstream things like the Headspace app, for example, the fact that there's millions of users on that shows that this stuff, there are resources available and it's popular for a reason. Yeah. So it is a time where you are being supported with that. There's going to be less. Sorry.
Calf.
There's going to be less friction that you need to face, versus before you were facing some support level friction of people being, what are you doing? You have to deal with that, like the resistance from family members, friends saying like, why would you do that? Like, be normal type of thing. So that's kind of dissipated for the most part. Plus, there's just such a plethora of resources out there to
Yeah.
do all these things, to delve into anything, not just meditation,
Right.
but to delve into all this stuff, to delve into personal work. There's sections dedicated in bookstores of like things just saying the same thing over and over because so many people want to tell people about their experience from it. So it is a good time for it. It is the right time for it. Again, the only thing I would say as like a final takeaway on that is that be prepared to do the work that comes along with it.
Sure.
For me, my favorite personal development books, in my experience, are not the ones that you just read and forget about.
Right.
They're the ones that you read and they give you action steps within it.
Exercises.
Because you need to put these things in practice.
Yeah.
It's like you need to make it a part of your routine if you want to actually experience it.
And, Allen Iverson made it very clear that we're talking about practice. But and again, you touched on this, and I want to reiterate it again. I mean, being that we're in this point of the conversation is, I believe we're being challenged to stand on our own 2 feet as humans, as people, and we give ourselves little credit sometimes. And our strength and ability as beings is insane and is immense. And you can access that today. You don't have to wait tomorrow, the next day, wait till you go on some traveling adventure, wait till you go do something crazy, whatever. You can access that right now. It's just we have to choose to do the work. And when we become self-empowered so much that, we don't need something outside of ourselves all the time to have these incredible insights and to live our lives, that's when this world's really going to really start to go bananas here. So, the choice is, building. Do you want to choose to start building that, today and now, or continue to wait? That's a choice that we each make, right? But lead us with something that's an action step here. What someone wants to start empowering themselves now. They want to start exploring themselves now. You talked about a meditation practice for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Anything else someone can float around with?
Yeah, my simplest exercise I always like to give people is to embrace the power of gratitude. It helps to break the negative cycles of the mind.
Yep.
It's easy to get caught up in how difficult life is or in how challenging life can be or the things that are not ideal or don't match up to your expectations of them. An easy way to crack that is just by regularly reminding yourself of what you're grateful for in life. I don't care, and I'm not going to say I'm someone who tops the list of most challenging lives by any means, but I've gone through my fair share of shit.
I remember when you stubbed your toe last year.
Yes, that was rough. That was a rough 6 months. It's everyone, no matter what. I know people in way worse situations than I do, and they can all easily pull on a lot of things they're grateful for.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you really feel that your mind is what's stopping you, but you have a genuine desire to do something about things, start with something as simple as that before you delve into the book. So let's say you're going to read the personal development book that you were drawn to or recommended to you. Before you even step into that and let the mind take its toll of this isn't going to do anything, just get yourself into a better space.
Yeah.
And then be consistent with it. Make some type of a daily routine with all these things that you actually want to try to give them a fair shot.
Yeah.
It's like if you felt inspired, it's because obviously something in your life wasn't jiving that you want to change it.
Absolutely.
So if you don't want to keep status quo and you want to do something different, give that thing the passion and drive it wanted when it first came about. We all know what it's like to be like, I'm going to start meditating. Yeah. And that moment feels great. It feels like there's no way I'm ever going to stop meditating. That's going to change my life. Yeah. But then when it comes to actually doing it on day 3, you're like, it's not working yet or whatever, stuff like that. Give it a fair freaking shot. Yeah. It's like, remember what that excitement was. Push through the rougher days. Realize, this is another good one. Even the people who claim to have, every time they meditate, they're sitting on top of a freaking mountain and they're seeing Archangel Michael and there's fairies floating around and shooting them in the butt. Whatever they're saying that's so profound, I don't discredit that. I don't say it's not. But they also have days where their meditation stinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
They also have days where they go nowhere and they sit in their mind and they think about their taxes or they have those days. So nobody out there is some supreme being that is that you need to get to a point where you're not susceptible to that anymore.
Yeah. I.e., sometimes social media can be misleading.
Yes, highlight reels. It's a highlight reel.
Highlight reel. Yeah. You're good. It's good. Insightful podcast episode here, I think. There's nothing left to say. There's nothing left to say. I mean, I don't know. I feel we've covered, at least, again, for my personal goal, and, people might say a bias or whatever, but, my personal goal was simply just to ground the subject out a little bit, get us thinking a little bit more not logically, but in our hearts about it, really look at what's taking place, what's happening, and coming back to that before we treat it in the same way we've treated everything else, and this insight of, Mama Ayahuasca being upset and wanting to leave the planet and stop assisting. I mean, I've heard this a number of times now from people that take the time to tune into some higher states of consciousness and so forth. And I think it's an important message to consider.
Yep.
And that's it. Anything else?
That's all I got. I mean,
that's all I got. I puked it all out in the bucket.
That's right.
I left it all over there. It's in some sewer in Costa Rica.
My body's still trying to reproduce the bile. That's struggling. It's been 15 months of just reproducing.
Yeah, that's it. That's all. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story and the personal takeaways and wisdom. And, maybe we'll have these guys back on there sometime soon.
Not a problem.
That's it. That's all. Not a problem. I hope Teals. I hope, what's his name? Teal Waters.
Teal Waters, yeah.
I hope he's listening.
I hope he is too.
All right, that's it. That's all for this episode. And, I said I would share a little bit about, sort of what my message is and something that I've always felt deeply within myself. And it's kind of, been something that I've sort of just stuck true to because it's kind of what's been the message in my heart. And it's, I've always stuck to the idea of just my own journey. I feel like, I'm here to kind of share the experience of the insight, that I've gained, the work that I've done, all these different aspects to, sort of becoming who I am today in this moment have all come from making the committed choice to simply explore consciousness entirely with what is available to me within myself, i.e., I have not used anything externally to do so. Now, I don't think this is a good thing or a bad thing or anything, and it's not about that. It's that I simply, very deeply believe that at some point, should we want to truly reach deep states of consciousness and do so in a way that's available to us at all times, we need to practice that. And I think that the way to do it is to really make a commitment to, like Mark was saying earlier on in the episode, in a lot of cases, these things, even traditionally, ayahuasca wasn't even used by people as much as it was used by one shaman who would then shed light for people. And it wasn't really something that people would use to gain insight. It was someone would share insight with them by doing it. And today it's a little different, and that's okay. Again, there's no judgment of the experience. It's more so, my message is to really drive home the idea of we have all this stuff. We're capable of all this stuff within ourselves. And I've just seen too many people and have witnessed the experience too often of people giving up all their power to something outside of themselves. And again, while I believe that you can gain a certain level of insight at some point, you got to turn within and you got to continue that message. And I truly believe that change does start within. And I don't want people to feel like they don't already have everything available at their disposal in this moment that they can, have these experiences of looking within and understanding and moving beyond some of the challenges they face. So that's my message. That's what I'm sort of living example of. And again, this is not to state good or bad, but more so just to inspire that, it's entirely possible to do whatever it is that you need to do and fully commit to it and fully live it and fully be it and fully be in your heart simply by, doing what it takes. And the breath is one of the best ways to do that. Anyway, we'll catch you next time on the Collective Evolution Podcast. Thanks again so much for tuning in. And if you haven't yet rated this podcast, please consider rating it on iTunes for us, as well as leaving a little bit of feedback. It'd be very helpful. Thank you. Take care.